Hello, friends. My name is Steve, and we are here. All of us are here today to discuss the first book in the Wars of Blood and Shadow, Curse of the Mistwraith, and this will be spoiler filled. So if you have not read the book yet, go read it and then come back and watch or listen. So we'll go ahead and start with some introductions for everybody that's joining us here. Chibipo, will you kick us off, please?
Of course. Chibipo, a longtime reader, and recently just started posting some book reviews too, and happy to be here. So.
Before Jenny, before you, I just want to give a huge thanks to Chibipo for being our guide on our because he's done a really great job not spoiling us. So it's very hard to do. So kudos for that. So we really appreciate your help.
Thank you.
And of course, Janny.
What can I say? Writer, illustrator, creator of this world, which, by the way, unlike many popular epic fantasies, was not grounded in gaming. One mind, one creation. That's it. So if you want to murder somebody, I'm it. Nobody else can take the
blame. And Chris?
My name is Chris Mullen. Sometimes YouTuber, sometimes appear on Steve's channel, and first time reader of Curse of the Mistwraith. But like I've said before, Empire Trilogy is my favorite series of all time, and my wife's as well. That was one of the, when we first got together, one of the kind of the, loves and joys we shared together in the early stages of relationships. So,
and Robin.
Hi everyone, I'm Robin from Bookends and Biscuits, I think part-time YouTuber as well, and a first-time reader of this, but the same as Chris. One of my favourite series is the one that you mentioned, so very happy to be here.
And Jared?
I'm Jared. I'm a part-time booktuber as well at the Fantasy Thinker, and this is my first time reading Janny's work probably because it wasn't originated in gaming, so I kind of missed it in my early years, and now I'm getting to it, and it's great. So,
I'm glad you could join us. And Layla.
I'm Layla Goshi with Balladine Magazine, and I'm also a first-time reader. I wasn't able to join the other discussions yet. Just had something going on every weekend, but I didn't want to miss this, so I'm just happy to be here.
Nice. And Varsha?
Hi, I'm Varsha. I have a tiny YouTube channel called Reading by the Rainy Mountain, which I have been really slacking off on recently, but Steve's been letting me post the podcast episodes, so that's cool. I have read The Cycle of Fire, which I loved, and To Ride Hell's Chasm, so this is my 5th book by Janny Wurts.
Wow. I'm impressed. Well, because those books just dropped off into nowhere. Hell's Chasm was released post 9/11, and it was in a 2-year dead spot for publishing. Nobody was buying books. Nobody was featuring books. Everybody was in shock. And so that book just dropped out of visibility almost instantly. So that's why I'm impressed.
I think, Patrick, Leo, and Philip Chase, they mentioned it quite a bit on their channel last year, I think, around the time I discovered BookTube. But Cycle of Fire, I found and read by myself. I want credit for that one. Yeah, that one's a really good series. I think all of you love Curse of the Mistwraith, so I suggest checking that out. It's beautiful.
Well, thank you.
Well, I guess we can start with Janny. Where did this idea come from for this series? What did you always intend it to be a long series, or where did it spark from?
It was absolutely designed to be a long form work from day one. Even though the outline for it fit single-spaced on a Royal Portable typewriter on one page. If you were to look at that original outline, you would be astonished at how the series followed it very firmly, first to last. Originally, I wanted to turn the trope of the dark and the light on its head. I got tired of reading every fairy tale in the world where the dark-haired person was the evil one and the blonde was the hero, and we're so fixed on light and dark and color of this and color of that, denoting symbology that's baloney. So I really got angry. So I decided that was the first thing. I was going to have half brothers. They would be opposites. And I was going to turn that trope on its head. It from there into, and you guys, I was really amazed when you picked up the anti-colonial theme. Yes. When you picked up the anti-capitalist theme. Yes. Those things were not in vogue back then. And so I think some of the themes in this series are actually going to hit stride now, because in a way, it was also anti-technological advances, and the technological advances have outrun our ability as humanity to keep up with them and to contain them and to even stop the damage from them. And yes, there's good side, but the mix mash that's happening right now is causing a great deal of suffering. So those themes kind of worked their way in. In fact, every theme in its kitchen sink worked its way in, but the epiphany moment that turned this series into what it is was because I was mixing and matching periods, because the planet that this series takes place on has restrictions that are not apparent at volume 1 at all. It will emerge slowly as you progress through the series. So I had to mix and match technological developments historically here with different time periods, because things would develop at a different rate on Aethera. So I started studying warfare, seriously studying warfare, from about the Romans up to when gunpowder started changing how wars were fought. And so I spent about 6, 8, 10 months reading book after book after book. And then the crowning moment was I walked into the docudrama Culloden, which was done in black and white. It was a stark representation of the Battle of Culloden Field when the clans went up against the British Empire and got wiped out. That was the complete change in Highland culture, began with that war. And up until that moment, I had played in a pipe band. I had read all the poetry and the literature. I'd read all the wonderful little Jacobite novels that romanticized that period. When you saw that battle depicted in stark black and white as to actually what happened, incompetent leadership failed to give any orders. They placed their forces on the most disadvantaged ground possible. They were starving for 3 days before the battle commenced. And the British proceeded to open up cannon fire and shred them. And nobody responded. And so pretty much it was a slaughter. I walked out of that documentary and my head was reeling, not just reeling. Not only was I sick at heart, I was furious, because that was the awakening moment when I saw that our history, our news, our entertainment glorifies and romanticizes war, convinces us from a very early age that might makes right, right wins, that war is noble, that this is a way to solve a problem. And stacked up against all the recent research I had just done, it flipped it completely on its head. And I said, this is baloney. Every single war that ever happened was a mistake. It was slaughter. It caused more pain than it ever solved. History was written by the victor, and we've been duped generation after generation after generation into buying this false premise. And fantasy literature, frankly, is the biggest offender. And Tolkien, who I admire from the bottom of my heart for showing me that you could write in another world and make up the whole thing, that was really cool. But, the whole glorification of war, the light and the dark, the evil and the good, there's always a bad side. It's always so simple. It's always so mythically, resoundingly noble. I said, I'm done. So this series is going to shred that upside down, sideways, completely. When the violence happens, it's going to leave you wrecked. So this was not a popular viewpoint at the time that I started writing either. So in a way, this series is finding its stride now in ways that it was very slow to take back then. So who knows where it's going to go, but it was a labor of love from start to finish. It was my way of saying, we need to look at things differently. Critical thinking is super important. And all of our beliefs are tied to perspective and viewpoint. And when that changes, it has to force growth, or it forces fanaticism and a shutdown where people say, no, I'm not going to see what I was just shown. I'm going to go back into my old beliefs and I'm going to armor plate them. And I'm going to continue to march down that thicket of thorns. So that is a rough out of how this series began to become what it is. I spent probably 30 more years or 20 something working on it before volume 1 was presented. And I sent that in as a finish. So volume 1 was sold to the publisher as a finished book.
Wow. Question.
It's an open floor, so anyone feel free to pop in.
How did you decide on the style of writing that you chose for this book?
Every story and everything that I write, I use a different style to present it because it reflects the story being told. This was the one that I said, no holds barred, no pulling punches, no dumbing down.
Yeah.
No, I'm going to take the maximum of what I know, what I see, and what I can put on the page, and I'm going to put everything in it that I possibly can. And in some ways, that's too much for people. If you have aphantasia and you can't think visually, the visual is all on the page. If you can't handle the fact that some things are going to be very gritty and real because I've actually done them, I'm going to put it on the page. It's designed to be an experience, and not everyone wants that because it's going to kick you out of your rut quite a bit. So, but this one I said, I'm not going to pull the punches. I'm going to put it all in there. And, for the people who say, oh yeah, she used the thesaurus to write the whole book. No, I gained my rich vocabulary.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the things that really strikes me about the critical reception of the book, because I've tried not to read too many reviews, but there are some reviews that they're almost personal in their attacks against your use of language. They take it personally that somebody would write in that kind of style in ways that I don't think I've ever seen. That must be very, I'd say, difficult for yourself, Janny.
No, it isn't really, because the review isn't about me; it's about them. It's exactly about how they felt when they read something. And who am I to say their experience is not valid? It's not the standpoint I came from, but it's all about them. So if it made them angry, I can't protect them from their own feelings. I'm not here to worry about what they think when they write something. I'm here to put it on the page as I see it. And it's up to them to take that experience and make of it what they will. I did have an interesting experience once where somebody wrote, this was back in the day before the internet, and they actually wrote physical letters, okay? So wrote me this nasty note about how dare I write bad writing, on and on about terrible bad writing. And I wrote them back a note, and I simply said, thank you for writing me. I respect the fact that you felt this strongly, and I appreciate that you took your valuable time to let me know how you felt. And the most I can do is wish you well and respect your opinion. I wrote 2 of those kind of letters. The first person wrote back and said, oh, I'm terribly sorry. I realized I was in a terrible mood and I was putting it on you. And I apologize because I really was angry at something else. So, okay, I was a scapegoat. All right. Second person wrote back and doubled down on their opinion because they said, my father taught me when I was very little not to write like this, and I got punished for it.
Oh, jeez.
So how dare I break the rules and go outside the box? And that one made me cry because here was a person who was a poet that got crushed. But I can't fix what was broke. I can only sympathize. So I try to look at reviews in that manner. I don't know what caused that person to feel that way. but that's not my problem. But I can respect the fact that their feeling is valid, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't feel the need to shelter myself. I sometimes bite my tongue pretty hard. In fact, I can unbite my tongue. I can unbite my tongue because I had a really fun raised eyebrow moment with this group when they're all saying, the fellowship didn't grant Lysair any training. Why did they treat him so badly? And I thought, there's a whole chapter where Traith tried to dance Lysair into accepting training, and Lysair rejected them. He refused it. Free will. Their hands were tied. But yeah, Lysair, right on the page, decided that ruling a kingdom was more important and the greater responsibility. He did not have time or energy or did not want to spare the moment to accept an apprentice and training. So, wow. Chew on that. It's fun because that's where I watch what happens with this. And I say, part of the purpose of this series is to trip you on your assumptions. Something causes people reading that scene not to see that Lysair made a choice. They chose to see an injustice as opposed to a free will choice to reject something that was offered. Even when encouraged, it was offered and encouraged. And it was tragic that it was refused. So that's part of what this series does. And don't worry, if you miss something, it's going to come around, and it's going to come around with teeth, and it will bite you on the butt.
Well, speaking about the horrors of war, I think that the last couple of chapters here gave us a view of that, a little view of that, especially with the slaughtering of a lot of people in some of those battles. I'm just wondering how that affected you guys, you know.
I think Steve had just, I think it was around the reading sprints, wasn't it? And you were saying about chapter 17, oh boy, I can't say anything, but I can't wait to discuss it, kind of thing. And I wasn't quite at that stage, but it was very much in my mind of all of those scenes. I don't know if this happens to anybody else when reading, especially battle scenes in fantasy books, but it tends to be that my reading pace picks up because the kind of adrenaline that goes along with reading it.
Sure.
Whereas here, but I think because of the style of writing, it forces you to slow everything right down and actually really live in the battle a bit more, live with the experiences, live with the thought process, live with the actual, before the things happen, this is where people were at, and this is what the events that happened at, and it's kind of made it all the more impactful then, you know, it really did hit home and say, oh boy, that's not so good. So when, like, without going too much into it, but the bit where Lysair does what he does and murders, it's almost written that he's doing the good thing at the start, or that he might do the good thing at the start. You know, it is within his power, it is within his grasp to kind of change the events of history. And yet, in his mind, he still thinks he sort of did in some ways. This is better than what the other people were going to do, you know, but they just slaughtered everything around him. Really impactful.
You know, there's one section I really love, because I'm still thinking about trying to figure out where I stand with it, and that is the part with the children, the barbarian children. And this might be something y'all have talked about before, but you know, they essentially Lysair, you know, believes that Arathon tricked him to the extent of, you know, setting up this whole trick by first being kind to urchins in an alley, you know, and then here comes the battle, and the children lead them into a trap, and, you know, but Lysair had said, oh, Arathon would never he would never risk children. So then Lysair, he sort of justifies his own barbarity by saying, well, now I have to do this. So where I go back and forth is I'm not sure that Erathon did do that. I'm wondering if it's Lysair's paranoia, because I don't know. I keep going back and forth. Erathon seems very self-aware and aware of what's happening to him, and Lysair does not seem very self-aware. Yeah, am I on the right track there? But I love that part because I'm still trying to decide, and I guess further reading will tell me, where they fall on that. So
If you miss it the first time, it will bite you in the butt later on down the line.
And I look forward to it.
Jimmy Poe.
Yeah, my own thoughts on that, because I'm glad you introduced that, because I was actually, there was one subject I want to touch on. It's like, I've, read the series multiple times, and I admit my first early readings of it, to put it mildly, I read those and disliked Lysair intensely because it's such a horrific, a couple of set of actions there. But as I've reread them and, just delved into it more, I've honestly come around to, I don't know if feeling sorry for him, but definitely pitying him, because there's just no understanding of what, it's like he there's points later where he'll sort of admit that he's cursed, but there's no true understanding of it, it seems like. And he's as exemplified here, and I wonder if it was going through his head with the scene later with the women and the girls. He's all too willing to recast anything, that he experiences, if it involves Erathon, especially in any way, to be Erathon's fault.
Mm-hmm.
Like to go back a few chapters to Coronation Day, Erathon's just tried to sneak out, and Lysair is the one who, by publicly denouncing him and then throwing out the light bolt, that incites and instigates this immense riot, and causes people to die, and creates terror and everything. But as soon as he wakes up, there's no acknowledgement of his own culpability in it. He was just doing what was right, and everything terrible that happened is Erathon's fault.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing there. He's like, no, where he's like, yeah, I'm just doing what's right here. These are all corrupted. This is all Erathon's fault. If anyone's going to, feel remorse about it, it will be Erathon. But I'm not going to feel, bad about this at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He seems to couch a lot of his thoughts and dialogue in chivalry, which is kind of how he was brought up, I believe. But it's always so directed in anger towards either Erathon, in that manner. It's like almost a villainous take on chivalry.
Mm-hmm. Oh, great point. Yeah.
There was a line. Sorry, someone was talking.
No.
Yeah, there was a line at some point that Lai said that his sense of justice may have been twisted by the Mistwraith, but he gave over to it quite willingly, or something to that effect. I thought that was interesting. It didn't seem what Lysa was thinking about himself, and none of the characters around had enough perspective to say that. It felt almost like the author telling us that at least that Lysa is his actions aren't entirely due to the Mistwraith twisting his mind. And sure, he does not have the same awareness that Arathon has, but he is maybe twisting more than he should, or he probably would have if it was just the Mistwraith. That's what I took from that one line over there.
I think.
Oh, go ahead.
Go. No, I was going to say, I think it was mentioned as well, if I remember correctly, about when they separated him across, they may have affected it there and kind of made it worse as well from that going on as well. So it's kind of like not just the Mistwraith, it's also the saving from the Mistwraith that's kind of twisted him a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was really interesting, the idea of having a twisted chivalry. I think it was really interesting.
Yeah. And I think there was when Tucker and I forget who, Karadman, they're having a conversation about how upset Tucker is about how the Fellowship misused Lysair. And Karadman mentions that the Mistwraith wouldn't have gained an opening if there wasn't already one. So he seems to be somewhat susceptible to have his sense of justice misguided, either by the Fellowship's doing, or he's prone to that, perhaps.
I think the exact line was, where opening did not exist, it would not have gained foothold.
Mm-hmm.
And if I recall, it's like it, at least through the experiences, we know it seized on, memories from his past and whatnot of, the feud between Amaroth and Carthan, and how it, spoiled his childhood, and Arathon's treatment of him during the Red Desert, and just put all those doubts and just like magnified them by 1,000.
I'm interpreting some of Lysair's weakness, I guess, or behavior is because he hasn't had mage training where he could discipline his mind and just kind of have that wider understanding of himself and what he can do. And so that's where I'm leaving him at the moment. I'm not against him as much as just waiting to see, how he'll come out of this.
Yeah. He does seem to have some awareness still. I think there was one point, I forget where, but he was trying to blame Arathon for something, and then he's like, no, that's not his fault. I don't remember which. Oh yeah, there's farmland, and there's no grazing, or like grass. I think there's no grazing, and he's like, oh, I'm going to blame Arathon for not for leaving these fields without grazing. So sorry, I'm really mangling that, but then like he rolls back and says, no, that's not true. He finds other evidence to oppose his view, and he's okay with that. So he's not quite like always twisting everything out of proportion, but also there are some things that he's overinterpreting as well. So yeah, that's really interesting. There's some conflict there for sure.
Yeah, it's like if it involves Arathon, it is very likely to get twisted around. I think this one you meant or mentioned was he was thinking more of the clansmen in general rather than Arathon specifically. So and why that lands the way it is as Janny said, is some things that'll come up later, which is really fascinating stuff. And so he has some, but again, this will get into spoiler territory. But yeah, it's if it involves Arathon, it can be very difficult for him to have any form of rationality.
If you look at the events in this book that are revealed about the two characters in this book, Lysair was a toddler when his mother abandoned him. In the middle of a furious struggle between his father, he literally saw his father attack his mother over the Svalen. So that started a scar. if you think about, everybody can't necessarily look at Lysair as being that totally naive. He was raised to be a diplomat. He was raised to rule. He was raised to look at the many as opposed to the few, and lead up to the moment in that alley where Arathon is building shadow ships for the children. What's really going on there is Lysair is furious because he thinks Arathon is derelict of his duty, that he's walked out to do this frivolous thing. And he walks head on into the poor quarter and sees abuse of children that he never imagined would exist. All he saw was the smooth little patina of the upper crust nobles, and he saw their problems very clearly because that's what he's trained to see.
Mhm.
So that was a deeply upsetting moment for him. It threw him headlong onto mucky, soft ground that he couldn't reconcile. And that led to the scene in the garden where he was literally having a conflict of character. He couldn't see which way to go. Was his way that totally wrong? Could he condone what was happening? It threw him into crisis.
Mhm.
Now comes the curse, where his sense of justice will answer to logic, but not much else. So it's very predictable in many ways, whereas Arathon grew up raised by mages. He was a bit of a prodigy. He was an initiate master by the time he came of age, which was 20. So 18, he had not quite completed that initiate transition to initiate master. By 20, when he came of age, he would have undergone that test. And that test would be contiguous with the same on Athera. So he is a master initiate at age 20. And he is thrown into this position where he's taken captive by the enemies at age 23, with the perspective as a master initiate. And that is going to carve and shape everything that he does. Everything, from what he will tell you, to how he will react, to how he responds to each situation placed in front of him. And I'll let you unravel whether he's good, bad, or whatever. But those two princes were each shaped very strongly by their upbringing. And one was scarred by it. The other was equally scarred in many ways because Arathon was raised by his grandfather. His mother died when he was very, very young. And he was put to a very difficult course of discipline because of those prodigious gifts. And you will see in the series, there will be more detail. But a lot of what is there is already on the page. If you were to see it, it's mentioned he was a master initiate. It's mentioned only once, but it's there. Subtleties. I hope that helps to sort that just a little bit. The progression as you see the characters move through in this book. I know it doesn't make a lot of sense at the time you read it because this epic fantasy isn't shaped quite the same way as the standard epic fantasy where the big bad is going to come in. What big bad? You know, it's not like that. It's not like that. It's going to play on your assumptions there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that Lysair, when he's trying to explain why he hates Arathon, etc., he uses like the idea that he's just a parrot. You know, it's this pejorative that he goes on saying, but this guy's just a parrot. You can't trust him. You can't, you know, it's almost like a class or race thing that you would use against somebody else in society, just to label somebody and tar them with that brush to get people on side and saying this is the reason that we're doing this. But also, you know, given that Lysair is supposed to have like the noble upbringing, is supposed to have the training and leadership, that actually by the end of it, I think it was maybe in the private chat Farsi, you'd put in the line where Arathon is basically showing they actually have great leadership skills through his actions, you know, and the fact that made you really emotional at that stage, for instance. Yeah. It shows the power of having the upbringing and leadership, you know, and then the actions that back that up, and actually how people respond differently to both of those things, and how that can be really powerful to read and experience.
Yeah, I thought so. I enjoyed that. You know, as they were going into battle, I mean, I enjoyed reading that section where Lysair was showing his leadership skills and you know, I could see how he could be an inspiring leader. You know, and something I wonder, and I might have missed, and I think I've asked this before somewhere, but their mother, it's, did their mother intentionally, I feel that the mother did not think of Lysair as much. It just seems that Erathon has had a better family experience than Lysair in regard to his mother's side of the family, you know, with the grandfather. And so so what were his mother's intentions, I guess? Well, we come back to the mother at some point. Because his mother was a mage, right?
Yes.
So this seems like there's a thread there that either I didn't catch or it's a read and find out.
I have a couple of comments when I get to. Our friend Eddie Castro's here. Hey, Eddie. Thanks for coming by. Parmita's here. Hello, everyone. So glad to tune in. I knew Wars of Light and Shadow was not rooted in gaming after reading To Ride a House Chasm. And then, of course, after reading Curse of the Mistwraith. Our friend Rachel Morley is here, or R.A. Morley. Thanks for coming by, Rachel. Shad is here. Lots of familiar faces. Thanks for coming by. And, of course, Mr. P.L. Stewart is here. And he mentions Jenny's endings. Boy, does she know how to stick the landing.
Mm-hmm.
And he also mentions Lysair being married to Justice. As I read the shorts and gained a bit more insight into this bloodline and what that means, I too feel pity for him and wonder what it would have been without the curse. True justice means impartiality and fairness, but one must conform to the truth to be truly just. Justice must be grounded in reason, and blind justice leaves no room for compassion. And of course, Erathon's prime trait is compassion.
Nice.
And Parmita, me at the end of book 1, Erathon is wonderful, Lysair is awful.
I'm a Parmita. At the moment, certainly.
I have a feeling we'll go back and forth with that throughout the series. But speaking of turning things on their head, I think when I read the title, I was expecting the Mistwraith to be something different. I liked that it played on, or at least my assumptions of what the curse and the Mistwraith would be.
Yes.
Not sure if anyone else felt the same way.
And it's a pretty large scale Mistwraith as well, right? Like it's planet encompassing the mist. Yeah. I didn't expect it to be that big also. I thought they'd walk and go fight somewhere on top of a mountain or something. I don't know why I thought that.
So the Mistwraith is captured, but his curse remains.
Right.
Yeah.
The Mistwraith is definitely only confined.
Right. Yeah.
And you're not going to see into the full nature of it all at once. It will unwind. And there's a whole pile of things that you won't see until the finale volume. I know it's there. So all the seeds and all of the things are present in volume 1. That's the fun part. It's all there. And when you read the finale volume and you see to the bottom of what actually happens in some of the scenes in volume 1, oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I don't play all the cards out front. I don't give you the rules. You learn as the characters do. And so the final volume will blow your mind. I stick endings. Remember that. Final volume, I stick endings.
Cannot wait.
I think pretty much every chapter in here, I was telling myself, okay, there's a lot more going on here. And then I'd read the next chapter and be like, yep, there's a lot more going on here. And then I read, and they just kept going like that. Even at the end, you mentioned Erathon's a prodigy. But he's also a prodigy for music as well.
Sure.
And I thought that was just a beautiful ending that he went off with the bard.
Well,
And,
you know, in the first volume, both characters get what they want, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
Both characters get exactly what they want.
yeah. Yeah, despite through the whole book, despite fearing they wouldn't get that they had to do something else, you know. And so that was that's very, very cool.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite scenes actually, when Halloran was speaking to, I can't remember, it was probably Kjol or something, trying to explain and win him over. And he's having a conversation, and he says, "Oh, by the way, I'll just play a song while I'm doing it for you," to kind of show you the power of the music. Actually, is I think we talked about that previously. Is, you know, the power of music actually within the world. How far does it reach? What's its real true importance? All of that kind of stuff. So it was like, and then the person came away at the end and went, "Oh no, you're right. That's a nice tune, by the way."
I think I did like that scene where, you know, it's like he you know, Halloran walks in, you know, and had heard everything that Erethan had played, and his enticement to get, you know, to try to get him to be his apprentice is just, well, the mechanics of your playing could certainly be improved upon, and then took exactly what Erethan had just performed and, you know, like, just made it, you know, that much better, and, you know, left everyone stunned.
Yeah.
Did you catch the sleeper line from the very beginning of the book when Erethan's having the flashback to his early childhood, and he grasped the first principles of becoming an initiate mage, and he said it works just like music.
Music, yeah.
Wait for it.
I have a feeling music's going to play a huge role as well. So,
But going back to the style of writing, I absolutely love that, because I'm a speed reader, and I could not speed read this book because you have to read every line, because it keeps you harking back. And after the first part, I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to really slow down and read this, because there's so many little details just like stuck in there that are so interesting, especially when they turn up later on. And I'm like, oh, I caught that, and I really enjoyed it after being initially a little frustrated that I had to take it slow. I really enjoyed it as I got into it, because you get the payback, and it's really nice.
Well, usually it's the speed readers who do the DNF 1-star, bam. So I hand it to you for sticking with it. Part of the challenge of writing this is that I'm working in so many layers at the same time, and you can't see them at volume 1, but they are there. And as the series continues, those layers are going to emerge into the foreground, and they're going to be on page. So when you hit Peril's Gate, it's writing on like 9 different levels, and it's got to be taken to 12. And at Peril's Gate, it will start to speed up the volumes. After that, the style will start to be a little bit easier to handle, because I'm not having to introduce all that. So I had to prepare for the fact that this story was going to move on that many levels, and it can't be done in a quick style. So in a way, I had to begin at volume 1 and carry it, so that you would be prepared for that level of intricacy going on as the series actually gains momentum. So it was a very considered decision. Speed readers are not going to do well with this. They're going to get lost really fast.
But as I said, I did. Once you get into it, it is worth it. So I think people if they have the same issue, just need to really go with it, because it is so rewarding. And once you get into it,
I would fire back with this one. Try speed reading Gene Wolfe and see how far you get. So why is it that people are willing to give Gene Wolfe or Malazan or some of the other very deep epics the time of day and not rush? What's with this book that they want to rush and they get angry when they can't? So, you know, that's the way I would put it in perspective. Try speed reading Gene Wolfe. You'll go right over your head. You'll completely lose it. It won't work. It'll fall apart.
Yeah.
But
those are not meant to be swallowed whole.
Yeah, but those books are famed for being difficult or approach with caution, if you know what I mean, in terms of, you know, at the outside, I'm really picking up because Son or Malazan is going to say, you know, this isn't for everybody, you know, so people go in buyer beware in some ways and prepare for that. Whereas I think maybe the readership isn't as large for this series, so fewer people know that that's what's going to
But
happen.
you don't see people getting angry because they couldn't swallow Gene Wolfe. They just go, "Oh, okay, not for me." So I don't understand what's ticking people off here, but maybe that's good. I don't know. I only wrote the thing. I'm not responsible.
I've seen a few comments on Reddit about Malazan too, that just people who don't like the investment, but I love the investment in deeper reads. I really do. And because every book has its own rhythm, and so it's for me personally, it's just coming to understand the rhythm of that particular book and how it's moving and what's there. And when Robin mentioned details, something popped in my mind of one little detail that I liked, which was Arathon and the boy whose name I can't quite remember. Is it Jeets? Jarrett. Where he said, watch out for him. He's my brother, or now he's my brother. And that just stood out to me, that he has that care for who he considers his brother now, while he's in this cursed war, with his half brother. And I felt like that did show, it helped show a side of Arathon, and that's probably why, just like Paramita, I came out just a little bit more friendly toward Arathon at the end, but still pulling for Lysair. But I love that kind of detail, and I think others where we're getting just enough characterization, through those details to understand the characters on a deeper level. So, so I can't wait to see what happens there.
I think there's a difference in approach on books. We get used to front-loaded books these days because people have to. There's this thing of I better be hooked by the first 20 pages or the first 50 or the first that first scene or that first line better grab me or I've lost my attention span. And so I took a very different approach here with a book like Malazan. It's the whole pie's on the front page and they smash it, and there's all these millions of pieces and all this really wild, cool stuff going on. You can't figure out any of it. You spend 10 books figuring it out until the whole thing comes together. I did the opposite. I started with a very small pinpoint view and expand it. And the pinpoint view has all the other views in there, but you can't see it yet because you don't have the perspective. So the front-loaded book, you get the perspective as you go. This is a different way of getting the perspective as you go. So just a different way. I do endings. No secret of that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Varsha.
Oh, yeah. So I have a question for you, Janny. For readers, we have to slow down quite a bit as we read the book, because every sentence, I think, has weight, right? Like I was thinking about, I know I've seen some comments that say it's too verbose or whatever, but in my opinion, it's actually the opposite. I feel like it's quite succinct because every sentence says so much if you're able to read into it. So I was curious, as you write them, how long you spend crafting each sentence, or does it just like flow naturally because you already know what you're going to say?
Oh boy. It doesn't write necessarily quickly. Some scenes do. The scenes where there's high-pitched emotional tension and some dialogue go quicker than the narrative scenes, which literally I'm carrying all those 12 layers, even if you can't see them. So no, it's not a quick style to write in at all. It takes probably 10 rewrites to arrive at what's on that page. The prologue, for instance, was boiled down to 3 short paragraphs. It was originally 3 pages. So typically when I finish a draft, it will melt down tighter as I discard this, discard that. everything that's shown, every detail that's shown is not window dressing. It's either there to create mood and to contrast or to sharpen the emotional impact of what the characters are doing, or it's there to build a sense of place. And there are reverberations in those senses of places that are going to come to mean something later. So sometimes I will do a scene and I will put it in there with shock value to sear that scene into your mind. And I will do it on purpose. It's not frivolous. It's not done egregiously. It's done because there will be another scene that will bear on the principles that were alive in that scene and active. And you have to remember it. You have to remember it perhaps an entire book later, in need of a finale. And without that searing shock value scene preceding it, you would not remember. And that scene at a finale of another book would not carry. So I had plenty of time to consider what to show, why I showed it, but there is nothing gratuitous in there in any way. And there's so many sleeper lines that you'll go back and go, oh my God, it was right there. And it'll just look like a little piece of window dressing, but it is totally not. I really had fun watching your discussion when you were talking about how powerful were the Fellowship of Seven. And you were all scratching their heads. How powerful were the Fellowship of Seven? And I'm going like, I have holes bitten through my tongue. I was amused, okay? And in a good way, because you can't absorb everything that you see as these books move forward because your eye isn't trained to what to watch for yet because you don't have the perspective. But I said the very first time Sephir came on stage, very first moment you see him, power great enough to shatter mountains was faultlessly directed to bring a scene between worlds. Right smack on the page. The second time, when Arathon comes eye to eye with Asandir, very, very first time in that little woodcutter's cottage, he walks through the door and Asandir looks at him. Asandir's focus is on him. It brings him to his knees. And the line that was used was, he was blinded by the infinite. Arathon was blinded by the infinite. It dropped him to his knees. This is a very controlled character who shows almost nothing of what he's feeling. Brings him to his knees. Now, you're still wondering how powerful the Fellowship is. These are things that you probably would wait and read the whole series and then come back and go, how did I miss this? Those kind of sleepers are all through every book. They're all there. But your focus as you read might be on something else based on an assumption from other epic fantasies, an assumption from your upbringing, your culture, the news, the way you're taught to parcel information. You're not going to focus on the thing that really counts there unless you read really slowly and AP style of focus. AP isn't going to miss much. He'll miss some things. He will, but he won't miss too much. So yeah, how do you feel, as you go through this, you almost have to train your eye what to look for, and you won't be able to until you have the perspective, until you understand what the Fellowship is really doing. You aren't going to see what they're really about, and you might miss exactly what they are, even though it's right on the page in front of you.
I think it was the last discussion we had when we were reading off Janny's notes, and you said, "Are you enjoying this, Janny?" Well, there you go.
Oh yeah, this is fun for you. I think was the line I said. This must be fun for you to see.
Am I enjoying this book, guys? You have to realize, I have been left on my own with these books for years and years. I haven't even had an edit of these books. I didn't even have anyone at the publisher read these books after Peril's Gate. They took them and shot them straight to the copy editor.
Wow.
So it was all on me. The good news, I got to write exactly the story that I envisioned, and it did not get messed with because I didn't have fandom yelling at me. I didn't have an editor screaming at me. The bad news, it's all my fault if you don't like it.
And
So I'm actually really enjoying watching the effect to the readership because I haven't gotten to see very much of that. It's just been me and these four walls doing this book that I had this dream that I was going to write, and I was going to pull no punches and no stops. I was going to do this huge epic thing, 50 years of work, cramming it in between other projects. I was writing this thing constantly and working on it. So now this is the payoff. To see you get confused, get angry with it, enjoy it. It's like, wow, it's out in the open. It's actually getting legs, it's being seen. So I do not look on my readership. I don't look down on them. I have immense respect for the fact you're willing to wrestle with all this stuff because I know what's in there and I know how many layers and levels it's working on.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a privilege. It's a privilege. And you're my favorite people.
I think it's sort of testament to, because this was obviously planned like turn of the year, and people had said, yes, I'll do the read along. And as I was reading it going, this is so different from basically anything else I've read. It is so dense in what's going on and what's happening. God, when we get this live show, will everybody turn up? And everybody has turned up, has got through the first book and is here and is really engaged with it and is really investing in it to the point of like, this really feels something else.
like a fellowship.
Like a fellowship. More than 7.
All right, let's keep the Mistwraith out of it, though.
Well, that means one of us is the Mistwraith, maybe. I don't know.
I wanted to pick Robin and Layla's brain because last time we talked about at the end of every chapter there's a little bit like a preview or kind of a rundown of other little snippets. I wanted to know what you both thought of that at the end of every chapter because when we discussed we enjoyed those little bits and pieces to kind of keep us going through the story and what else is happening in the world.
Oh, I didn't focus directly in on those, but I saw them but now after hearing Janny, I'm going to read them very closely again because I saw them as kind of like a transitional point to, sort of help us draw back out to think of the bigger picture, and I'm looking at one right now. And that could have been, it could just be this one I'm looking at. But in general, I saw, it's a way of transitioning. But I felt like it's also a way of pulling out to think beyond what we've just read. So.
It's actually a tribute to Roger Zelazny in a backhanded way. If you read carefully in the books, you will see tributes tucked in there that only I probably know they're there. 2 authors that I admired. Mm-hmm. And when Roger Zelazny wrote, I believe it was Lord of Light? No. Which one? Anyway, it doesn't matter. It was one of those. He has those little 3 one-liners that he shoves in between chapters, and he used them and he repeated them. It's the same lines each time, the Steel General, And I thought, wow, that is a phenomenal format. I'm going to rip it off, but I'm going to make something of it because we've all read epic fantasies where you had to read a scene and it just dragged. There was an important piece of information, and to construct a whole scene around that, just that piece of information would have taken you pages. Characters you're not interested in yet, action but there's an important little fact. It's also a fun way to bury little Chekhov's guns. Mm-hmm. So they're in there. So I don't know if you noticed reading these books, but the action always progresses simultaneous or forward. It's not like Tad Williams where you read and it's like we follow these characters 6 months, then we stop, then we go back 6 months and we start over again. Same time period. We follow these characters to 6 months up to present, stop, go back, pick up the next thread, 6 months. No, these books go simultaneous or forward. Occasionally I break that rule with visions or a prophecy, but simultaneous or forward, and those little one-line snippets are a way to carry that action simultaneous or forward without dragging the story back. But it originated with Roger, and that was my tribute to Roger Zelazny in there. And you might catch an echo. You might see a line or a thing, just something in there, and you go, gee, that reminds me of something from such and such. Probably you're right, because I buried little tributes to authors I admired in this work.
What did you think about those, Robin?
I really liked them. I think maybe I didn't give them as much attention because it kind of, to me, it was always the end of like a section. But I did I appreciate and enjoyed the as you said, it's the continuation of actually what's happening at that time in the other places, and it links you to them. So it was enjoyable to kind of to read those links as you're going forward. But yeah, it was something a bit different that I don't see many other books, but it was something that I appreciated.
I loved it so much.
Yeah, I thought they were necessary.
Yeah. They were like a little bit of reward. They did a couple of things, a bit like you said there. It kind of reminded you of the scale of the world. You know, the fact that it wasn't just, because a lot of fantasy can be very much on the train, on rails. You're with the characters and you kind of maneuver through the world. You go to the map and you kind of go, well, they're kind of going that direction. They're going to end up back there, kind of thing. But just kind of say there's things happening at the same time and kind of give you a sense that actually there's lots of pieces in play all the time. You know, while we've concentrated a chapter on here, there's all sorts of things happening. Some things ruminating, some things happening, some things stirring, some people walking out from behind curtains.
Yeah, I thought they were necessary for that reason. It gave me a sense that the world was a bigger place than what was happening just with those two guys. And, I looked at them as like little newsreels almost. This is what's going on in the rest of the world. And it really, I just added so much, I thought.
Mm-hmm. The world is a way bigger place. Way, way bigger place than you have any idea at this moment. And that brings me to, I spent some time today and pulled together some, a little bit of an idea of how much bigger the world is. Are you curious?
Very.
I pulled some notes of events that happened in Athaman beginning in the first age, and I carried it up through the second age, just little highlights. The first age of Athera lasted for 820-something years. 800 and something. So in first age, year 1, the etheric defense and the blessing ward for Rathane's increase was made, the Erathan increase. So there was a ward set up so that the unicorns could increase. The first stage began when the Paravians emerged in the world, and they did not emerge physically in flesh. They emerged energetically. And there's a place on the map where this happened, but you'll find out as you read. So there was a first High King and a first setting up of wards so that they could increase. Now, the reason why the Paravians came was because there were dragons who dreamed creation ahead of this, and they were wrecking the place. And there were wars. There were massive wars. There were massive earthquakes. There were sunderings. There were shatterings. And a bunch of the dragons said, this has to stop. We need to stop destroying the world. And so they had a dreaming where they requested, and the Paravians were sent to heal the problem. So, okay, in 110, Athaman was despoiled by dragons in dispute. So there were etheric wards set up at that site on Athaman, which is a node. It's a 5-way node. It's the 5th lane prime focus, and it's a 5-way node of energy crossings. There was a despoiling of that in 110. And the way it happened was there were 3 dragons. 2 were mated amicably, Beshazak and Querterazaz, and they were attacked by Kashakarak, who wanted to upset that mating. And there was a massive war that took place at altitude, and the spin-off from that literally smashed the ground. So there was again cataclysm. So the descent spun from that, created a grand cataclysm, the first sundering in the first stage. So that caused literally a continental smash. And if you look at the way the mountain ranges are run, there's fault lines that crisscross on the continent. And there is a real weak spot at the center. So the sunderings broke those fault lines. So in 122, there was a sundering, which was begun by that clash. In 123, the first warded wall was raised, and that was the first stone wall. So in 123, in the first stage, this was probably over 18,000 years ago. The first wall was raised at Athaman. In 215, the focus circle was built at Athaman. It is a five-sided node, so it's a pentagonal pattern that sits in the King's Tower foundation at Athaman. That 215 was when that focus circle was built to channel that energy and hold it secure on what had happened before. In 250, the Centaur Masons, the very first Centaur Masons, built the upper wall against Drakespawn, which were those two gargoyles that are sitting on the front in stone that are carved, Sid Lewin. They were very much killing things at that period. In 394, first stage, the 5 towers, the compass points, were built. And they were to defend that focus circle from attack. So there were 5. The central one was the King Tower, and the 4 compass points were surrounding them. In 512, the first parahedral accession happened. And so if you understand the Paravian successions, there are three generations. So you would have a Paravian name, the dynastic name first, and second and third, and then it would change. It would go to another family line. So there was a succession in 512. And the reason why was because a really terrifying Drakespawn called the Great Gathorn destroyed the high seat at Avenor. In 706, there were sieges by Sir Lwyn, that's your stone gargoyles on the front, and Drakespawn. In 706 to 708, there was a 2-year siege under the lineage of Parhedral. In 708, the walls were breached and overrun. The Sun Towers alone were standing. The first breach of the upper tier wall happened in 708. So that was the first time it was laid waste, but the towers still stood. So the first fall, they sent relief to Caeth Alcain with a protectorate dragon. So there still were dragons protecting things and helping the Paravians to defend. The first wounding of the protectorate dragon, the founding protectorate dragon, he withdrew wounded to the kingdom of Morover. And if you look Westland Sea, there was a whole continent there, and it isn't there anymore. So the first protectorate dragon that founded the protectorate went to Haven on Morover at that time. In 717, the defenses were rebuilt. This is still first stage. Then the second sundering happened in 774, which damaged the place again. And that is when some of the worst Drakespawn were spawned at that time. So really terrifying monsters came out of that. What you've got now is what's left of that stuff is at Myrtlevein. What's left of it. Okay, so the second sundering. In 827, there was a siege and a ruin again. The second fall, the second time the towers or the walls were broken, the towers still stood. That was when Ariathan, the first Parahedro, built an escape tunnel in a vault underneath that ruin. It is still there. In 915, the last of those Sardluin were eradicated, banished from the continent. Okay, the Second Age won. Athaman was abandoned at that time to Drakespawn. It was completely overrun, and the towers were sealed, so they couldn't get in there. The Second Age began when the Dragon Protectorate and the Paravians got together and dreamed they needed a force of destruction because they were losing this war. They were losing it. They were losing it bad. That's what brought the Fellowship of Seven to Athera. So Second Age won. Athaman was abandoned. In 482, there was an accession. In 590, there was another succession, and in 611, the nasty stuff that was parked at Athaman was driven out. And that was when the Assyrian blades were used. They were forged for that purpose. So your Assyrian blades that Arathon is carrying were created in the Second Age in 400s. And that was the battle that was won. And Sun Towers at that time were unsealed and reclaimed. In 618, a lot of the nasties that were inhabiting there were sealed at Rockfell. And so there was a sort of a bit of a golden age for a little while. The defenses were restored by 640. The walls were raised from ruin by 722. The second tier wards were built. So now we have two defending walls around Athaman. You bored yet? I can keep going. In 900, there was a seeing quartz built by the centaurs. It was enchanted by the Athelian singers and Calatus, and it connected Athaman with Althane Tower, so they had instant communication. Kianar Sunlord's regency began in 1542 after Marin Eliath was murdered. That's when the King Towers fell. The murder took place because the Mithurian that created the Methuri, which crossbred all the nasties that are left in Myrtlebane Swamp, the Methuri are gone, but they possessed the murderer of the High King. So there was a Methuri possession that caused that King's Tower to fall. And at that time, Kianar took over and there was a regency. So in 3651, Athaman was leveled again, and Kianar was killed by the drake spawn that got out. So there was a dragon that was wounded that founded the Protectorate, dueled with some of the greatest nasties at that time and died. And the horn that was broken off that dragon is still carried by the Praevians throughout history. And the horns are very serious business. Okay, in 3668, the third sundering happened. It was a Drake War that caused it. It was set up to destroy the Concord, which was the alliance between the Protectorate dragons and the Paravians. So there was a sundering of the continent that happened then. And in 3705, Athaman's defenses were rebuilt following that sundering. So this city has been leveled and built many times. In 3876, the third tier walls were raised. So we're talking 3876, Second Age, which was 18,000 something years long. Those ruined walls that you're seeing now are very, very old. Those foundations are very old. In 5126, the third Alionian died, which would have been Kianar's successor. And another Paravian dynasty took over, and it was a famed strategist. This was Kidorn Elraniant, the first Elraniant High King. And they began this massive war to drive back the Draeskamon, and that progressed throughout the Second Age. And they made huge strides under that dynasty. In 7015, the last of the Morovair Sidluan was eradicated. So the Sidluan were gone from the main continent, but they were still alive in the Westlands. In 7015, they were eradicated. So the Fellowship would have been heavily involved with that. In 8096, the Great Appeal was cast across the Vale between Athaman's Towers, Essair Circle, and Althane Tower, which was called for the return of the mightiest defender that the Paravians had ever had. So that was when Kianar Sunlord was recalled, reincarnated. This has never happened before. He's the only Paravian spirit to ever return. That's when his nomenclature switched to Kianar Moonlord. So he returned, and he was there at the beginning of the Third Age when mankind arrived. So that's a very old spirit. Been around a long time. So there was a real dark hour that caused that recall to happen. In 921, the cracked walls at Athaman were repaired. Mostly after that, it's successions. But the third tier wall were intact still at the time of the Third Age when man took over. So the Third Age was mankind's arrival. mankind would have taken over the Parabian digs there, and there was a reason for that. So there's just a rough idea. I mean, these are little peanuts compared to the events that surround all this. Back history is kind of a bottomless pit, because when you reach in and you pull one thread, they all go sideways, and suddenly you're seeing what's happening in all the other locations at the same time. So I tried to just go through and single out pinnacle events at them, and like when it was destroyed and rebuilt, just to give you an idea of what doesn't show.
So did I understand correctly that the 7 existed before man came
Yes.
to the scene? Okay.
Second age is the arrival of the Fellowship 7.
Okay.
Mankind did not arrive until the third age, mankind proper. So yeah, there's a lot that is shaken up behind the scenes here. You will start to see it. A little bit will come out in ships. You'll see a little more, but really the third arc is when it raises to worldview, and that's when you start to see where these factions are coming from. I took my time because it's too much to absorb. And that's part of the thing when you make an opinion about somebody and you don't know what their moral high ground is, and you don't know what their purpose is, you don't know what their history is, you don't know what their culture is. How can you judge what they're doing? Really can't. That's why we have wars on this planet, is because we don't take the time to sink into the understanding of the culture. And sometimes ne'er the twain shall meet. But many times it's just sheer ignorance, sheer othering, sheer inability to take the time to know their stories.
And the leadership, which I think we're seeing through Arathon and Lyseer. Okay. Okay. I think we got a tornado warning. I'll be back.
You be careful.
You take care of
Let's be careful.
What a way to leave.
To myself.
My life's very different from Lila's, obviously.
Eek.
I was trying to follow along on this map, and I didn't figure out that was I was calling it Ithamon in my head, so I didn't figure out until halfway through which place you were talking about. But yeah.
Well, I chose the triple etheric node where they cast a request across the veil, because you've been to Althane Tower in this book. You went through Iser's Great Circle, and you've been to Atheman. So those 3 places made sense. There were other places that wouldn't have made sense. I just left those out. I left those pieces of history out because I tried to tie it to what you would have seen in the first volume a bit.
Did you also did you also call the Fellowship a destructive force, Justin? No?
You asking me or Justin?
Janny. Yeah, just now when you were saying the Paravians brought the Fellowship in, or was it the dragons? I forget, but they needed a destructive force, and so they brought the Fellowship in. Is that what you said, or did I completely?
That's exactly what I said. Watch for it. Watch for it. They needed something that could stop what was happening. And I don't want to say too much about why things were coming undone so badly in the first stage, because many of those things are going to unveil as you move on through the series. That was a very small clue. You're going to see it. It's going to come out in ships. You're going to have somewhat of the back history of that. But yeah, they needed something that could draw a line in the sand here and stop what was happening. And I'm not going to give away why they were in such a precarious position and why it was so dangerous and why all this stuff was so wildly out of control, because that will come out in the main series. So I shielded you from a lot of facts here.
Good catch.
Yes, good catch. Just want to catch up on some comments. There's some good ones here. And our friend PL, he was commenting, that's just me, just a big fan of amazing writing. Janny is the best I've read, and surely it is a work of art far beyond the context of being art by virtue of being pieces of fiction. It's masterclass, and I do know where PL got his endings from now. Now I know where he was influenced. He's PL mentions, I'm privileged to be able to share a space with people like Angie, who's so insightful and amazing, and of course Blaze, Nico, and Janny herself. I am very blessed. Zero Zaku 1, Janny, I'm loving Curse of the Mistwraith. Never have I read a book that I've read that made me really take my time with it. So I think we can all relate to that. I have to run, but just wanted to say awesome chat. Thank you for hosting, the guests for attending, and all their amazing contributions, and of course Janny for giving us this iconic series. And, Zero Zaku had a comment or a question. Also, what are some fantasy hidden gems that you can think of or slept on that more people need to read?
Just directed to me. Fortress in the Eye of Time by C.J. Cherry. Oh my gosh, that is an amazing series. Ricardo Pinto's Stone Dance of the Chameleon, if you can take really, really grisly, because it's very, very dark. There are a lot of them out there. So I would say go to Our Fantasy, look up on Reddit. Cristobal did a what happens when you've read all the best books, and she did a rundown of a lot of places to look for hidden gems, and she included a link to a sequence of my posts, because for many years I spent on that forum recommending books that hardly anyone had heard of. So most efficient way is to go to that and check it out.
Yes. And our friend Jeremy Fee is here. Hey, Jeremy. I have the anthology Masters of Fantasy with a short story called Child of Prophecy by Janny Wurts, and I'm curious how much of the series should I read before reading this story?
You could wait until after Curse of the Mistwraith, or you could open with that story, because that was designed as an opener for people to check it out. It was stuck into an anthology called Masters of Fantasy, where a lot of people wrote in their worlds, and it was at a time when my publisher wasn't doing anything with publicity. So I actually wrote it to familiarize people with a little bit of the back history. The Gallant does it better, but that one could be read ahead. But it's a very different kind of story than the series is. So in a way, it's apples and oranges. If you want more background going in, check out that short. If you don't, if you'd rather that the story unwinds it as it goes, definitely you could read the series. But I would say before you start Arc 4, a lot of the material in the shorts is involved in Arc 4. And the reason why a lot of the shorts got written was because readers assumed things were way too simple. And they were saying, oh, this just happened, and it happened overnight, or it was, and I'm going, wait a minute, the history's a whole lot more intricate than that. So the shorts tend to spotlight things that you would assume were simple, but were not. So going into Arc 4, where it's staging for the mysteries, we've already gone to worldview. Now we're lifting it to another level. A lot of the material in the shorts will play in Arc 4, and it would just increase your understanding.
This all seems very simple. Was never a thought that entered my brain once during my read.
Well, you know, the old question of how did the blood feud start on Dosseneller? And people say, oh, yeah, they just started a blood feud one day, and it was just quick. It wasn't one event. It was a number of events. It was a number of miscommunication, a number of assumptions made by one side that another side did something. Corrupt officials were involved that were hiding things and shoving blame onto other people. There was false information being exchanged to cover their tracks. So there's a long section in the frequently asked questions that goes into that blood feud, which actually took quite some time before it really became entrenched. So it wasn't an overnight kind of a deal. People were lost on both sides before it became to the point where they weren't talking to each other anymore. And you got to realize Dasaneller is an ocean world. It's very, very small land masses with a massive ocean. Messages did not pass very frequently on this world. There was long delays because you couldn't use a pigeon. It was too far. The distances were too far. And if you ever wondered, well, why was this world all ocean and it was attached to this world where there's no oceans at all, and it's virtually a desert and hardly any water, and then here you have it there. What the heck's going on here? Why were these three worlds linked? Well, if you understand the back history, the lesser Krakens were exiled to Dasaneller, to an ocean world with a desert in between, so they couldn't come back. And the fun part is they're still there, but they're under an accord with the Fellowship of Seven. And it's like, you don't eat the people or you get squashed. So, all the things that are going on underneath the water in that world, you don't know, but I do. So there's methods to the madness in this whole thing. There's reasons for everything being set the way it is. There's a history there. There's a purpose to it.
So just to, because this was fascinating to me, and just to touch back on what you mentioned about, how the powerful the seven were and, everything. There was also a couple of moments that I found, especially one in the last, in 16, I believe it was, when Erethan uses the seer's weed to, scry out how the best method of saving everyone, the clans that he can. And there's a line in there at some point where he mentions, because he struggles trying to map out everything and gets overwhelmed with the possibilities. And he mentions that Sethvir would be able, it basically implies or outright states that Sethvir would just like almost casually be able to do what he was doing here and not miss a beat. He would just, he could pass everything, every single possibility. And that was just mind blowing.
Instant. Sethvir also has a history because he became warden of Althane Tower. And there was a transfer of power in 5100 Third Age where he was designated to take that post from the last departing Paravian to Hovel Warden. So he had a gift, and it was massively, massively expanded. Prior to that, Sethvir wouldn't have had quite that instantaneous grasp. So yeah, he can do it instantaneously, but it wasn't natural. He was actually past the reins of power in 5100 to take that wardenship.
It's when they arrive at Althane Tower, I think, and it's not like, the way you describe it, it's not hyperbole, and Erethan's awareness, encounters Sethvir for the first time, and he like sees his eyes and describes it that he sees the width and breadth of Ath's creation, looking back at him, because like Sethvir is basically seeing everything.
Well, there's another little sleeper line that shows how powerful these guys are.
Yeah.
It's right on the page. But we go through our lives, and in every conversation and every encounter with another human being and in every encounter with a news story, we're seeing a pinpoint. And there's a range of things that are happening that we miss because we're a single individual viewpoint. We're not built to see multitudinally, simultaneously, everything at once. And so we have to process things one thing at a time. And these books are built to point that out and to hopefully make you pause on your little one point and say, what am I missing here?
Yeah. It also shows how powerful the Mistwraith is too.
You won't see it all until the finale volume.
Yeah.
But it also, Sethvir's perception is also kind of, it's like a magnified version of what everyone mage has, I think. Like the bit when Erethan's sitting there and he's preparing, he's been fasting and whatnot. to do the scrying, and he has detached himself. So like his mage perceptions, he's perceiving all these things around him, the feelings of the trees and the leaves and everything. But it's like a smaller scale, like when I think I highlighted this on the Kindle app, after they're attacked at Ethamon, Dakar's observing Erethan as a Sandir, like you mentioned, Erethan's a master initiate, and he describes them as like identical except in scale. So it's like Erethan, and we know Erethan's like far outstrips Dakar's talent.
Good catch.
Yeah,
good catch. Watch for it.
I think I remember this vaguely, and this might give you a laugh. I think I remember reading that line way back. Yeah, no, I know I read it back when I did one of the first readings, and I was like 15 or 16 at the time. So I think my conclusion that I jumped to was that Asandir was some kind of time traveled version of Erethan, who
That's
had
a new one.
ascended unto nigh godhood, and there was it was a crazy thought, but that's just where my mind went. So.
You haven't answered the question yet of where the Fellowship got their powers. It's coming.
Oh. Yes. Well, I'm going to be quiet there.
Duct tape moment.
Yeah.
Are they immortal, or will we read and find out?
Well, I think that question's already answered, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose the spirit forms mean that they're immortal, but I suppose
no, you're seeing it right in book 1. There's 7 of them. 1 is missing. 1 is cut off. That leaves 3 that are still got a body, and there are 2 that are shades. Now, are they immortal, or are they not?
I see. Yeah, I suppose their body is mortal, but there's. Yeah.
But they can still continue to exist
and influence
in Ethera at that frequency as a shade. And you've got one guy who they said, we're not sure if he can make that crossing yet. He's been damaged. So would the crossing be successful or not? And how that sorcerer was damaged, there'll be more information coming. But yeah, what I would have called it was the Paravians are what I would call semi-mortal. They live until accident befalls them. And then they depart. The Fellowship is here, and they don't depart. And the answer why is going to come out later.
Sorry.
I'm not going to spoil anything, but I mean, if you're looking on the page, are they immortal? Here's half of them, a chunk of them are shades, and some of them still have a body. So, the clues are all there. But why is it different? So it's a matter of knowing what questions to ask. And that's true of every time we encounter another culture. We don't know the right questions to ask. If we don't know their story, we don't know.
Yeah. I suppose the question was, what does death mean for the Fellowship sorcerers?
Well, I'm not going to say a word because you just have to read on that one. I know there. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I did like the scene where the flask that's containing the Mistwraith, and they seal it up in Rockfell. And I like the way you get a big display of power there too, because like thunderclouds, when they just opening the door, and the whole thing is wreathed in clouds and everything from that. But I did like the way that you did that whole scene as like they get ready to start their work down there deep inside the peak, and Dakar, because Dakar being Dakar, they're like, yeah, go to sleep. And then the next thing is Dakar waking up. And I thought it was really neat because like you'd read other books, and the whole, the flask being put down, and, all the spells being cast and wards being placed around it and everything would be like this entirely huge drawn out sequence that someone would write out that probably, and I'm going to get into hard reverse soft magic, that someone would probably exhaustively have details of how every single little thing worked, written down in there, and it would probably go on far too long. And here it's just the car falls asleep and he wakes up and they're almost done. And it's just
there's some things in this book and in this series that you have to realize. You saw them opening and setting the wards over Rockfell from the outside. Often in the series, it will spiral around and come to that same thing, and you will see it in more detail because you're ready to see it in more detail. And it may spiral around again, and you may see it again from the inside. So what you saw there is not a stage setting. It wasn't just hand wavy stuff going on. The clouds and so forth that were happening were as a result of other things going on.
Right.
But you don't have the advantage of the vantage point to see what was happening yet. So you saw what looks like a bunch of stage setting that looks pretty cool, but you don't know the why of it yet. So often the series will spiral over an event or over something that you saw from a surface point of view. You will see it in more depth and more depth and more depth as you gain that vantage to look down on it and you see the breadth of what's happening. It's going to be huge. So there's a lot going on in those pages you're not equipped to see yet.
Yeah. Next book.
Part of some in the next book.
Some in the next book, yeah. But I did like it because it was apparent there was more going on. But I liked that, like I said, it wasn't, it's not like stripped, and I don't know. I guess I don't like hard magics a lot, where it's not like stripped down and exhaustively defined. It was just like, there's a lot of stuff happened here, and you're only seeing it, it's like you don't get the whole exhaustive, ritual of everything that they were doing to seal it up. It's just like the car's asleep, and then they're just kind of nudging him like, hey, move, we need that space.
If it's appropriate for you to see from the inside, you'll be introduced to it by degrees, so that you'll never see the rule book. When you come to the point where you need to see something in this series at that depth, you'll already know the rule book because you'll have been introduced to the layers much more slowly. Like I said, I don't front load my stories.
Yeah.
I let you grow into it because otherwise it's just a gaming rule book. And I'm sorry, but that kind of thing sometimes puts me to sleep when it's all reduced. There are 5 or 6 different ways to access the magic on Authorial, and they all key to the same principles, but there's different methods of access. And when it's time for you to understand those different methods of access, you will, but it won't be because you were slapped with a rule book. You'll grow into it organically as the characters do.
Yeah, that's just a thing I liked. I was like, I don't understand everything yet, and that's fine.
Yeah, and it sure looks cool. So you don't have to understand it at this point,
I thought that particular bit of the book was really good. I thought there were 3 aspects that really stick in my mind. Was the random staircase that was there because it's just mages that go up there, so for ease. I thought it was quite cool. The second point was about the fact that they talked several times about how actually things don't always stay stuck in there. Like that was just, and they didn't seem to think that was a big deal, which I thought was interesting. And the third part I took away from that was the random bit that oh god, I forgot his name, the A wizard person. And he's just randomly talked about the sacrifice that could have been made of the car to make it more secure. And I was like, oh, that's kind of going down a weird one where they're like, oh, we totally could have done that and sacrificed. I was like, oh, that came out of, gosh, okay. And then just kind of left it. And I was just like, oh, that's interesting to see if any more of that comes in the future.
Watch for it. There's another sleeper line there. Sure, there's moments in history where things have happened and there's stuff going on. So yeah, you caught a sleeper line on there. Like I said, it's all on the page at volume 1. But you have to be superhuman to catch it all, because you got to realize I spent years developing this before I published volume 1. Okay, 1972, volume 1, 1993. It was sold as a finished book. So I had plenty of time to tinker all the pieces and understand exactly what I was showing. So, yeah, I have holes in my tongue from biting my tongue from the 1 stars that go, all this stuff was just thrown in here and all this junk, extraneous, too many adjectives, too many words, too many notes. Okay, fine. I didn't waste my time for 20 years, but as far as you're concerned, I did. And you're better off reading something you enjoy because it is that intricate. And other fantasies out there are that intricate.
It's amazing.
You
Keep track of it all.
Yeah. This has that same quality of depth and a lot of the same themes that a lot of the great fantasies do. It's just I approached it from a different angle, but it's very much all there.
I did like that, Robin. I did like that line, about the dark practice with Asander making the joke, because it reminds me of, just it sums up his relationship with Dakar so well, where it's like someone at some point, I don't think it's this book, says, Asander has Dakar for an apprentice. Teaching that scatterbrain anything would frustrate the patience of bedrock. And I'm like, yeah.
I thought Dakar, the whole character, and I didn't bring it up because I wasn't sure if you guys had discussed him previously. He was just such a frustrating character, I think, because he's kind of lovable, but also horribly frustrating with a lot of the decisions, and how he lives his whole life for this whole thing. And it just, I found him a difficult character to get to grips with, because I felt like, as I said, I liked him because he was kind of endearing, but what on earth as well. So
there's still things up my sleeve that you will not see till the finale volume concerning Dakar. There are discoveries about everything. The tiebacks in that final volume that go clear back to volume 1 are going to just fry your brain, because it's part of the reason it took so long to write. It was fitting everything in a concise manner that I could fit it all in 1 volume and still have it flow seamlessly.
I was going to say, is that book like 3,000 pages long, or?
Oh no, it's not. It's actually shorter than most of the Malaysian books. It's actually the final manuscript rang in at, I can tell you, 290. It's in the 290s.
Right.
1,000 words, and most of Malaysian is over 300,000. Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb is over 300,000. George Martin's first book is over 300,000. I can reel you off. Tad Williams over 300,000.
Yeah.
So I brought it in at 296, I think, something.
Wow.
But yeah, I've had spats with editors over length, even over Master of Whitestorm, for God's sake. But no, we rang it in. It's going to be 1 book. But yeah, there were lots of fantasies over 300,000.
Yeah.
The song is actually 2,600 words longer than Peril's Gate. So it is the longest volume in the series, but not by a lot. 2,600 words is a short story. Okay, it's about 3 printed pages or 4. It's not a lot. So anyway,
wow.
We did. You guys were in one of your discussions. You were curious about the Paravian pronunciation of what Arathon said to Haliran, and I dug that up for you. And here is what that line would have sounded like: Kuel, Aeon, Imuridaean, Ai, Dathol, Nasaarin.
Lovely.
So that would be it. I was thinking when you guys asked that you were curious, I created some files in MP3 for the pronunciations for the narrator when they put Destiny's Conflict into, and I'm thinking I may want to upload that, and people can have the Paravian, the pronunciations. So I provided it the narrator. Hopefully he would use it, and he did for the most part. So I could provide that. It's something I didn't think people were interested or cared about much.
Yeah, we can upload those in the forum for pronunciation.
Yeah.
Because the language of Ethera is not, I'm not a linguist. I did not do what Tolkien did. I didn't shape civilizations around the language. I didn't even try. I'm not a linguist. Instead, I broke down a language of power. So actually the energetic structure of the world is built into the language. And there's different tiers of access of the Paravian, which you'll see as you read on. So it's really a language of power. And if you break down the words, then you understand the energetic makeup of whatever it is you're talking about. So that was the way I approached the Paravian language.
I suppose we see some of that in the scene at the end when Arathon is, I guess, releasing the ghosts of the dead with Paravian words, right?
You would have been using Paravian words, yes, to do that. Absolutely. The whole concept of name is not your name that you were given at birth by your mother. Your name is your energetic imprint, your energetic pattern. So the whole concept of name is not like Ursula Le Guin, where they memorized lists of names and that's where they built the magic. No, your name is your energetic imprint, your soul pattern. And not just people would have it, or not just living animals would have it. Everything would have it. Everything would have an energetic imprint. So you're breaking it down to the energetic imprint at, you know, a molecule has an electromagnetic signature. So you're looking at the complexity of that.
Yeah, I was curious about that a little bit. I was wondering about the layering of names. So, you know, molecules, people, for instance, have names, but then they're made up of molecules. So do we start from naming the molecules all the way up to the parts that make them, like the hand, the eyes, perhaps? Or do we have like one name for the person based on the energetic signature, or a name of all the molecules that make them, like the bottommost layer informs the topmost? Does that make sense?
It makes perfectly good sense. If you look at the physics of how everything is put together here, it's like building blocks. So if you take a mineral and you take its crystalline form, it would have one signature. The molecular form would be another. So your person is a lot more complicated than a molecule. A molecule makes up the body, but the person isn't the body. It would have a soul imprint or an energetic signature, which would be that consciousness. So think of it in terms of bundling consciousness. If you break apart your body, the molecule has a consciousness as well. It has an electromagnetic signature as well. So the recombinant form, the signature of that molecule would build into a form that might have a different energetic signature, but you wouldn't have to know all of the signatures of the molecules. It might, I'm now making sense. So yeah, you as a collective conscious being would have an energetic pattern, and that would be name. And the story will go into that in a bit more depth. You'll have a feel for it by the time. I wouldn't say I would break it down to the molecular level, but you'll notice that when Asandir cast and the Fellowship cast strands at Althane Tower, they are calling forth name. They are calling for those energetic patterns down to the last grain of sand and down to the last blade of grass. That's how they can make that accurate prediction, so that Sethvir's vision can be seen by all of them at once. And all those probabilities springing in all directions could be seen in one shot. So you get all of that consciousness pooled together, and they're naming those strands one by one by one down to the lowest levels. So it's a very complicated scene going on that page, a lot more depth than perhaps a first read through would suggest.
I didn't realize we're almost at 2 hours. So yeah, don't want to take up.
Everybody's missing their dinner.
No, I just got lost, and I looked up and thought, wow, I didn't realize how long it's been. But we really appreciate you coming by. We hope that you'll join us for book 2.
Of course.
Okay.
Of
Awesome.
course. I'm really thrilled if you're going to go on with it, that you weren't one of these, oh my gosh, this big, thick book, I've had it, bam. No, it's really great. It's wonderful to see you enjoying it. I hope that you appreciated what you saw first read through, because it's only going to grow. The second book has a lot more room for humor, a lot more room for some banter and some downtime with the characters. There's a lot more space to appreciate the world. There's so much had to go into volume 1. It's almost like it was very somber in tone. Ships will give you a breather from that. So be prepared to enjoy it a bit.
I enjoyed the first book.
Yeah.
but no, we have.
You know that if you got the hardcover, when you reach part 2, the American hardcover that you were just showing, that is Ships and Warhost in 1 volume. So part 2 is what became Warhost in the separated versions.
Oh, does that make it a part 3 as well then?
No, Ships of Mary, or US edition, which is what you have in your hand, Jared and Steve. Yep. That is both Ships and Warhost. Ships and Warhost were written initially as 1 volume, and it was a 1,600-page manuscript. And Britain said, if we publish it this way, we're not going to do it, first of all. Second of all, it would crack in half. Third of all, the expense. So the half-point shift is where it breaks. So the pure finale is in Warhost. It breaks at a nice point. It brings to a nice head. There's plenty of ending, but that's not the real ending. The 2 volumes were meant to be read together. And when it came out in the US, I screamed and yelled and pounded the desk and shouted, put it under 1 cover, because if Locust reviews it, they're not going to review it as powerfully strongly if they don't read the entire arc, which is all of arc 2. So they did put it out as 1 volume. It had to be a sewn binding. They did it as 1 volume, and Locust didn't bother reviewing it. But so what you have there is Ships and Warhost in 1, and there will be a page separation that says part 2. That is the opening of Warhost. And the only thing you're missing is the little header that goes over the chapter. There's a little line of verse that goes at the opening chapter of Warhost that did not exist until the book was split. So if you get the paperback of Warhost, or ask somebody to read the first 4 lines, or I will for you. But that's the only difference.
Wow.
So you have actually Ships and Warhost in your hand.
Yeah.
Cool.
Nice. No, we have a schedule planned where we have a reading, but we'll collaborate and we'll figure out a day to discuss the book. But yeah, we have it all planned out, so we're continuing.
Oh, okay.
Well, this could not be more perfect, because this will lead up to the finale release, and more people will be aware of it. And Steve, you just do a wonderful job. You're just so laid back and great with leading discussions, and you contribute so much to this community. And Jared, I hope you get more followers. You deserve them. And Robin, I'm not familiar with your channel yet, but I'm going to chase down and find it. So thank you all for being here.
Yeah, I have one final question, actually, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
Are you a musician, Janny?
Yes, but not. I don't have the killer instinct for it the way I decided to with the writing and the art. In other words, I didn't do it professionally. I got a loft full of stringed instruments, lots of guitars, a mandolin, a hammered dulcimer, things that I just fool with upstairs. Yeah. I did do occasional gigs back in the day. My specialty was ballads. And then I fell backwards into being able to study bagpipes under a true master.
Wow.
Roddy McDonald is gone now, but he would teach anyone that had the enthusiasm and the interest, and never charged a penny.
Oh.
He was a first-rate musician. He was absolutely awesome. And I pursued bagpipes very seriously for a long time, because I had the opportunity to study under someone who was that good. Yeah. I doubt I would have gone that deep into it, but who wouldn't when you have a chance to study under somebody that long for that many years? So actually, I was amateur state champion in Florida 5 times.
Wow.
grade 1, which is, and I played with some competition bands. So I was solo champion for the state of Florida back in the day. So yeah, I played bagpipes for a long time, studying under Roddy. So that's the extent of it. But did I ever do it professionally? No, because I think it would have torn me in 3 when I was already doing writing and art with that degree of seriousness. There's just still only so many hours in the day. So you have to have a throwaway.
Keep one as a hobby, you know.
You have to have a throwaway where it's not serious enough that you can toss it aside. Same with riding horses. I did the same thing. I rode horses very, very seriously. I sailed boats very, very seriously, but not with a killer instinct. Mostly for horses because the owners asked you to do things that were not good for the animal. And I always walked. So I threw away more opportunities because I refused to do what they asked because it was wrong. So yeah, lots of hobbies.
Well, it's pretty good hobby. I mean, you've accomplished a lot as a musician. just haven't been professional. It sounds like you've quite accomplished.
I guess I have a habit of getting curious and then digging into something. Guitar started when I was 9. Dad came home with one of those $15 junk shop guitars with the strings like a half an inch off the fretboard. That you tried to play it and you sliced your finger in half. And he brought it in and he dropped it into the rec room and said to us, I had 2 older brothers, whoever learns to play it can have it. And my 2 brothers went at it, tongs and hammers. I went at it, tongs and hammers. And after a month or so, with bloody fingers, I was still going and they dropped out. So it was my first guitar was just cheap crap. But I've moved on since then to some rather nice instruments. But yeah, so that's what started the guitar.
Wow. A quick update on our friend Layla. Tornado was on the ground a couple miles from my home. Wi-Fi went out, but now all is well. Sorry to miss it, but I'll read the next book and join the discussion. So
glad you're safe, Layla.
Yeah, it's glad you are safe.
Be safe, Layla. Hopefully everything's okay. But before we sign off, just want to see where everyone can be reached, or kind of promote their stuff. Chibipo, will you kick us off?
Of course. I'm available on Twitter on Chibipo1. I do have a little YouTube channel, but there's nothing there. And also on Goodreads is Chibipo, and posted a couple of things on Reddit on our fantasy recently. So
nice. And Janny, where's the best place to find you?
I'm the only Janny Wurts in the world. My email is no secret. It's posted on my website. I do pass through Steve's forum usually every day. So if you pop something in the Paravia thread there, or in the Curse of the Mistwraith, or any of the threads there that relate to the Janny Wurts, I will see it and I will usually respond. There's also a Paravia forum, which is accessible through my website. I'm still hanging on at the Dead Birdie. Don't know how long they'll have to kick me off because I refuse to cede ground to a turkey. I'm just not going to give up what everybody's built there to an idiot. So I have an account at Goodreads, and I also pass through our fantasy. So if somebody drops a thread there, I will usually see it, but don't expect me to pick up a direct message there. I don't log in too frequently anymore. And also I have a Facebook fan page, but I do not run that. Mostly that's run by my web guy. He will pass on to me important questions, but truly I may not see everything there, and that may change. But right now I just can't split my time all over the place when I'm all these other places that I'm pretty accessible. So you can always find me. I'm not difficult. Steve knows I pop up on his forum, and I generally pass through your forum at least once a day.
Yeah, we really appreciate you dropping by and guiding us.
Hey, it's a cool place.
Yeah.
It's a cool place. If I didn't like it, I wouldn't stick.
Yeah, well, it's like I mentioned, it's all the wonderful people. So I'm fortunate to have all of you around. But Chris, where's the best place to find you?
So you can find me on my YouTube channel, which is just my name, where I talk about books and movies. Every time I post a video, I'll lose a couple of subscribers immediately because it's like the thing that the people aren't getting it. And then I get it back in a few days. So it's kind of cool. Yeah. Or you can find me on the Patreon forums, or you can find me on Twitter at 7 o'clock shadow.
And Robin?
Yeah, I can find me. You can find me on YouTube. I'm also there. And then Twitter's probably the best place to find me. I'm quite active on there, and I think Bookends and Biscuits, like similar to that. Yeah, or on Steve's forums. After poo-pooing the forum because it was an old school method, it's absolutely wonderful and I love it. So
Yeah, it takes a little bit getting used to, definitely. And Jared?
Through my YouTube channel, The Fantasy Thinker, and I'm on Instagram with the same moniker, and I'm on Page Chewing as well. So
Nice. And of course, Varsha?
On my YouTube channel, Reading by the Rainy Mountain, the About page has other ways to reach me, and I also hang out on the Page Chewing forum with everyone else here.
Yes, and Varsha has the best outro, and she has like, just like check the about section. So why didn't I ever think of that? And our friend Layla, since she's not here, just want to mention she has a YouTube channel called Ballady Magazine, so everyone would be sure and check that out. And she is also on Twitter at Ballady Magazine or Layla Gauji. So be sure and look her up. She, fantastic work, lots of great stuff that she's doing. So be sure to go support her and her work.
Sure.
So thanks everyone. We are planning to continue the we're doing bi-weekly, starting May 16th, 14th. So anyone's welcome to join. We're doing every other week and discussing 4 chapters at a time, and then we'll finish it off the same way, hopefully, that we did this one. But so yeah, anyone's welcome to join us. Just swing by the forum and check it out. We have a lot of other stuff going on too, so come by and say hello. So thanks everyone for joining. Janny, of course, thank you so much for giving us so much of your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Thank you guys for being here.
So we will see everyone very soon.
Take care.
Take care.